Today we continue my most epic diorama speed build ever, but with only 6 days until Halloween, creating the spookiest location in Middle-earth at 28mm scale with 100% screen accuracy is somewhat of a daunting prospect. Last week we started work on the upper fortress of Dol Guldur, zeroing in on the famous courtyard and battlements from the White Council fight scene, pushing the new plastic kits to their limit, kit bashing and scratch building alike, the most screen accurate piece of scenery I have ever created. Look at that bad boy, that is literally straight out of the movie and ready for wargaming. But my goal of completing this mighty build before Halloween is looking a tall order indeed. I'm hoping at this point to complete the first third of this massive 36 square foot bigature, which means this mighty courtyard needs to be built high atop a rocky foundation, nestled into a precipice of cliffs, surrounded by spider infested forests, as well as having a whole bunch of additional towers, stonework, stairwells, and spooky Halloween goodness thrown in for good measure. Time is of the essence, but there is no doubt that Halloween is coming to Middle-earth. If you're enjoying Spooky Sarah month here at Zorpazorp, hit that subscribe button down below and strap in Zorptrons, we're going to have some fun. And by we, I mean you, I'm predicting a week of utter insanity. As we look to move our small scenic display to a full gaming board, we need to build our foundation. I shot down to my local Bunnings and got a bunch of masonite sheeting cut into 3x4 foot panels, and then mounted a layer of extruded polystyrene to be the bedrock of my ground texture. I actually did this before I'd even started the build in earnest, so this bad boy should be ready to go.
Just as an aside, when you guys build your boards 3 weeks before you need them, don't leave them outside to grow colonies of mold.
Thankfully, the mold was only seriously infecting one of the sheets, so I blasted that with a blowtorch and then threw it outside for future Lockie to deal with, and then heat gunned the crap out of the second one to ensure there was nothing nasty hidden within the porous surface, and then it was time to plan the layout. Now this third of the board features the courtyard we've built so far, and also the tall tower that rises in the east, where Gandalf is tortured by the Keeper of the Dungeons. Now over on our second channel, Zorpazorp Streams, we had a blast doing a live stream working through the entire conceptual design process of this tower, working out the exact dimensions and shapes of the tower's footprint, which is essentially a large hexagon, and that allows us to find the position of both the tower and the triangular courtyard within our 3x4 landscape. Getting the exact configuration actually took about 3 hours of planning to ensure I had just enough space in all the right areas to make the game board really function. I need enough room at the back of the corners for 2 gates that will lead up to the castle, as well as a tunnel through the foundation between the eastern tower and the courtyard, and I need to leave enough space for the spider-infested forests. We are really juggling a lot here. I grabbed some big sheets of expanded poly and started mocking out the full landscape to get a feel for the height of the towers, and then before I could start finding my cliff faces in the foam, I started with the point of constancy, the large northern bastion, whose stonework is going to continue right down to the ground below. I grabbed some sheets of extruded polystyrene and started to sculpt the lower levels of the bastion using the same stonework techniques that we looked at last week. Again, if you want an in-depth tutorial, I've linked my video up above. But I soon realized that I was going to face a unique challenge with this build. I needed to build the layers of rockwork in certain heights so I could assemble the tower in parts, allowing the 2 top layers of the courtyard and dungeon to stay modular. I built a tower structure to the height of the expanded foam cliff face, and then started cutting down my large sheets using my hot wire cutter, nestling the foam in against my tower. I decided my tunnel through the cliffs would be spanned by an archway, so I grabbed another leftover piece from an old resin kit of mine and broke it down into 2 arches and used those to mark the space of the tunnel, and then cut down a bunch of foam to make the raised floor and the base of the eastern tower foundation. I glued down all the sheets with foam construction adhesive and weighted them down with nice heavy books to make sure all the pieces stayed true, as that glue does expand as it's drying, and then repeated the process for the tunnel, the tower foundation, and a second layer of white foam to complete the full height of the cliff face. This thing is getting seriously massive. I can barely fit it in frame on my widest lens. The next challenge for us is to find a way, build a plan to get a seamless join between all of our cliff face surfaces and the fortress above. We want it to look completely seamless, but still have the dungeon and the courtyard completely removable. Before we begin on the dungeon, it's time to talk about today's sponsor. And well, it's me. Yes, I'm absolutely pumped to announce that our epic fortnightly Battle Games in Middle-earth livestream is back after my 4-month I Have a Baby hiatus, and it's already kicked off over on our second channel, Zorpazorp Streams. Each fortnight we go through a single issue of the classic retro magazine serial Battle Games in Middle-earth that roped many of us into the hobby in the early 2000s, painting and playing some insane live battle reports. My beloved Patreons even have the chance to become the official sponsors of the minis where painting, have crazy characters named after them, and watch them take part in the campaign before getting to keep them forever. Make sure you head over and subscribe to the second channel because you will not get any notifications from this main channel when we go live. And oh, if you're not already subscribed here, then what are you doing, you goofball? Smash that little red button and ding that stupid bell. Alright, enough shilling of myself, let's get back to the build. I threw the dungeon layer on top of the cliffs and lined it up with the bastion, and I realized I'd need to replace the green foam layer underneath the northern battlement. I made 2 small foam replacement stonework elements and cut away the green foam and created a seamless stone surface, but instead of mounting these to the base of the dungeons where the green foam had been, I lined them up on the board and mounted them to the cliffs and the lower bastion. This way, the upper piece slots behind them, and I'll be able to work the cliff face right up to these carved elements and create a really natural built-in look. I needed to continue this approach all the way around the base of the dungeon, so I moved along to the eastern point of the triangle and cut away a strip about 2 inches wide following along the outline of the dungeon foundation. I glued this down with some wooden skewers to ensure that it was really held accurately while it was drying, and we will now be able to build cliffs and rubble right up to that surface. Between these 2 points, I wanted to experiment with continuing our Dol Guldur plastic walls into the cliffs, so I hacked away some of the excess polystyrene and cut away and glued down another strip of the dungeon foundation. Next, I grabbed some wall tiles and cut them in half, as I only need a small amount of bricks popping up above the cliffs, and then assembled those into the same structure as the walls above. I glued them in with PVA and hot glue for a long and fast grab, and then added some filler details to blend them perfectly, and now we have another hidden join. I fell in love with the amount of realism this process was adding to the build, really helping to mesh the scratch builds and the plastic kit components, so I decided to repeat the process on the southern slopes of the fortress with some even larger walls. I cut away another strip of dungeon foundation and glued it down in place, again using adhesive and physical bonding to keep it firm, and then hacked away some of the white foam to allow for the placement of 2 more full-size wall tiles. Ensuring they had nice complete pillars on the ends will really help to blend them into the cliffs later on. Before I could begin working on more foundations, I actually needed to do some work on the courtyard piece, as I had left the southern bastion and western flank completely unfinished, as I wasn't sure how they would mesh with the rest of the board. I started off by making a battlement from low ruined walls and marked that down on the extruded poly baseboard and then cut that down to size. I textured the side of this piece with a brickwork pattern and then continued to carve a continuation of the floor tile pattern from within the courtyard all across the foam surface. I continued this pattern of floor tiles and stonework all the way around the back to finally have a complete upper courtyard foundation. Next, it was time to make a seamless join between this rear stonework and the northern bastion, and I had initially planned on just extending the diamond of the white resin building down to the ground like the bastion, but as I played around with an offcut of foam, I was struck by an awesome idea.
Oh man, that looks sick.
Accidental battlements for the win! This awesome little additional hexagon not only gave me the opportunity to add a little more flavor to a pretty full part of the build, but this vantage point will also be a key defensive position over the gate below. I carved in a weird floor pattern recapturing the crazy lines of the interior of the courtyard, and then used some of my old resin kit stairs to join to the structure above. And then I needed to join this to the baseboard. However, I couldn't simply continue this form all the way down to the ground, as I would lose way too much real estate down below, so I had to carve a really interesting stepping down form which sloped away from the edge, reducing the cross section as the piece descended. I also had to ensure that the tower was built in layers to not only match the brickwork, but also keep to the various modular components of the build. I really got into the idea of creating a lot of space down at that ground level, so I hacked away a lot of the cliff and really exaggerated the reduction in cross-section and ended up making space for a great little inner gate courtyard. This piece will merge into the cliffs, which will wrap around the back of this structure to form one side of a chasm running through the center of the fortress, spanned by many bridges, including the one that Gandalf collapses on Azog as he tries to flee Dol Guldur. The gate down here will need to head up into that chasm and the fortress beyond, so I carved up a little quick and dirty stairwell and platform and mounted them into the foam. These will tessellate with the next piece of the board. I don't exactly know how yet, but that's future Lockie's problem. The gate will be formed by another piece of my old resin kit, which will eventually be housed between the bastion and a cliff face. It is Thursday morning. The video is meant to go out on Saturday. I'm sick, my wife is sick, the work ethic is terrible, and I'm making the build even more complicated. I've got an epic tower that we finished on the back, and now I've just added another tower element here on the eastern point. We're going to use more... Yeah, they just went all over the floor. We're going to grab some more pieces of the Dol Guldur plastic ruins and add another stairwell on the eastern point so that models can access the dungeons from the ground level, dramatically increasing playability, but it's going to take even more time to build because I have so much of that to spare. Now, as I mentioned last week, as I researched this build, I actually ended up with a couple of spare copies of some amazing Weta Workshop Middle-earth books, so if you'd like to win one of these, like this video, subscribe, and comment Chronicle down below, and this time I'd love to know your favourite character from Middle-earth that you'd love to see feature on the channel. I'll be picking one winner from each video and announcing them both in the third video of this series. Thank you so much for the amazing suggestions on what location you'd love to see me build. Rivendell was a huge favourite, but the responses were incredibly varied, which has been super interesting. I assembled a hexagonal structure with 2 flights of internal stairs, ensuring they would line up at the center of the top and bottom. Then at the base of the tower, I put down a single open archway and the first iron gate tile to help the flow of play through the stairwell, and then cut away part of the tiles mounted to the foam above, which would be replaced by the top floor of the tower. I sliced away a large portion of the white foam, including grooves for the columns so it would sit nice and flush, and then before I glued it into place, I gave the whole thing a pre-prime, which is something I should have been doing more of so that I won't have to worry about melting foam details with solvent-based spray cans. To make the floor of my tunnel, I cut down a strip of XPS and imprinted a flagstone texture using a textured roller, and then glued it down along with 2 small spiral staircases to link to the base of our tower. With some extra pillars and a foam sheet, I continued the tower wall down to the floor, deliberately changing the foam pattern to keep blending the stone aesthetics. And now it is time to summon the power of Aule and play demigod of the earth as we create an incredibly realistic rock face with about 20 kilos of plaster. I grabbed a huge set of vulcanized rubber rock molds that I regularly steal from my mate Dan and spent a whole day just casting a heap of rock faces from plaster. This is just a cheap plaster from Bunnings as my usual Hydrostone supply has run out, and it's just mixed with water and demolds in about an hour. With a horde of pieces at my disposal, I decided to start with the northeastern rock face and planned out the rough layout before gluing anything down, using a combination of smaller and larger pieces. Don't worry about leaving small gaps between all of these rock faces, this will all be blended together and look utterly seamless very shortly. Then I set about adhering the cast to the foam by using a combination of partially cooled hot glue and high bond PVA. This will give us a fast grab to the foam without melting it, allowing us to keep working, but will also help keep it in place over the next day or so of working before it gets fully locked down and blended into place with modeling compound. Creating the rock face is a really therapeutic and rewarding process, when you're not murdered for time, that is. Make sure you carve away the foam to shape the hill just enough to give you a nice flat mounting plane, but don't feel restricted by the cast. I'm constantly breaking them down or reshaping them with a chisel to change their shape and create nicer joins on my rock face surface. Any broken face that you've made with the chisel can be easily made to look like rock with about 10 seconds of whittling back and forth with the chisel blade. To help enhance its realistic geology, it's often worth submerging some casts down into your baseboard to help the whole rock face feel a part of the landscape and not simply just plonked on top. You can see here how important that outer layer of foundation has become, as we can now work with the rocks right into the stonework, and there doesn't feel like a big obvious line between those layers. This structure looks like it was built into the rocky foundation. As we approached the eastern tunnel and gate, I broke up a large mold to interface nicely with the stone archway and the stairwell outer wall, which will tidy up pretty nicely with some modeling compound down the track. To complete the northern side, I threw in a few rock walls underneath the new northern bastion and blended them into the stairs, but I haven't continued all the way around the back yet, as I'm still not sure how the whole chasm is going to function. I did the same for the second archway and then trimmed down a large rock face to begin the eastern tower foundation, and I am loving how that space is starting to look. Then it was time to begin work on the southeastern rock face, but first we need to deal with this pesky southern bastion, which is currently just floating in midair. I first extended the edge of foundation that was affixed from the dungeon level to the cliff face foam so I could blend the layers effectively, and then I really wanted that bastion to jut out on a rocky promontory, so I cast one of my molds with some skewers embedded and impaled a large piece of XPS and then mounted that to the expanded poly bedrock. This will now give us a rock face mounting plane to work from the ground all the way up to the top of the bastion, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we say goodbye to fancy cutaways. It's time for a massive time lapse as we smash through the southeast cliff face because I am seriously short on time. This rock face was a bit trickier as I didn't have many nicely sculpted foundations to work up against, but I'm happy with the result in the end, and I think it'll all blend together really nicely. So this board is really coming together now. We can totally feel the scope of what it's going to look like. This rock face though does still look like a whole bunch of individual casts, so now it's time to blend those together into one continuous surface. And to do that, we are of course going to use Geek Gaming modeling compound, which you can buy from Zorpazorp.com down in the description. This is a plaster and cellulose fiber blend, and we're going to work it into all of those gaps and get one beautiful continuous surface. Modeling compound, possibly my favorite hobby material ever, and it is amazing for blending rock faces. This new formula dries super fast as well. We're setting in about 5 minutes here on a hot Aussie day, so it's crucial to work in small batches, but everything you're putting down is super strong, super fast, so you don't have to worry about dislodging it. Throw a bit of water in, I just do it by eye until it's a sticky paste, and start jamming it all over the rock faces into every crevice and gap until we have one smooth, continuous surface of plaster. The best technique for a smooth application is to jam it in roughly, and then after it's just started to harden, run your fingers over it with a bit of water on them, and then smooth it all out, taking away any jagged crags and blending right into the face of the rock molds. The big focus on this northern face is blends into the stonework, getting those looking as seamless and as built in as possible, and then it's on to the southern side. We've got a whole bunch of small pieces here integrated amongst the larger slabs, which are tricky to get looking uniform, but just keep working it till you're happy. And then there are some all-important gaps to fill under the bastion and into the plastic wall tiles, which really help sell the built into the cliff aesthetic. And there we have some gorgeously blended cliff faces. I cannot wait to paint them, but sadly, as I'm literally typing out this voiceover 3 hours before the video is supposed to go live, that is as far as we are going to get before Halloween. Deep down, I knew I'd never get the whole board done, but I wanted to at least get the cliffs painted and finish off the super spooky spider nests, but they will just have to wait until next time. This was an absolutely mental fortnight of long hours and 6-day weeks, and even though I didn't complete the challenge, I'm still rating this board as a huge success. I'm absolutely loving how it's come together. I'm thrilled you guys are too. A massive shout out to my Patrons who have been hammering with work in progress photos over on our Discord. If you want to support the channel, that's an awesome way to do it, or you can check out my shop Zorpazorp.com for all your scenery goodness, all linked down in the description. And stay tuned guys, November is going to be huge. We're going to take a quick break from Dol Guldur and return to an absolutely massive project. Stupidly massive, some might say. Lucky out.